Pringle is going to be with us here in just a few minutes to talk about some really cool stuff, things going on in his world, and we're going to get his opinion on a couple of things, and I'm really excited to have him with us today. But before we get into that, guys, what's going on in the world today?
Well, what was it that you said it was the National Day of?
I don't
One
know.
of the national days.
It is the National Blueberry Day.
Oh, hey.
Hey.
It's a live show, folks.
Yeah, that's what happens.
National Blueberry Day, and it would be,
It's awesome because I just had a cup of coffee at Wawa. Sorry, folks. We're just off. We're just off. Let's just call it what it is. You have those days. We're off right now, and we're just having all kinds of technical hiccups and technical difficulties, and it is what it is. But when you get back into the swing of things, that's what happened. So at Wawa today, we walked in there, and there was a a brand new pot of coffee that was sitting there that said blueberry cobbler coffee. And I thought, well, that's unusual.
And it was so good.
And it was good because today is National Blueberry Day.
Yeah, so now we know.
Yeah, and so
there's random.
You have these national days all the time. It's also National Freezer Pop Day. So I guess if you have a blueberry flavored freezer pop on today, it's a great day.
It is. It was also, didn't you say it was
National Chocolate with Almonds Day. So I guess you got to go have an almond joy.
That's good. We always like talking about sweets.
Yeah, we do.
We always do. But National Video Game Day?
And it is National Video Game Day, which
Yeah.
right now our boys are in the other room, and they are participating in National Video Game
Yep.
Day. And I know that video games have been around since the 70s. Some folks would say 60s if you count, or 50s even with pinball machines. But the question of the day that we're going to ask you to drop down below and hit the hit the comments section and tell us what was your favorite video game growing up, or maybe what your favorite video game is now. For me, you guys want to weigh in on this? Anybody want to weigh in on this?
I'm just going to say, classic is Pac-Man.
Yeah, Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man.
Or Miss Pac-Man. I loved Miss Pac-Man.
Somebody said that Miss Pac-Man won the the number one voted video game of all time. Miss Pac-Man, not Mr.
Yeah.
I guess girls
lots of
have
fun.
they dominate everything these days. And then my favorite is the old Galaga. That is I still have it on my phone. It's a great game to play. So much fun. So what's your favorite video game? Drop down in the comments below. Let us know. Again, we apologize for being off today. It's just when you switch back and forth the studios, we traveled over the weekend for the 4th of July, drove in last night, and spent the morning trying to get all the bugs worked out. It happens sometimes. So
it does happen.
Yeah. So anyway, you saw him pop up there on the screen just a minute ago,
Yes.
but I am so pleased to have with us today our guest. He is the former mayor of Anaheim, California. He is also the last Republican Speaker of the State Assembly in California. He is also the former chair of the California High Speed Rail. He is an influencer, and he's also a consultant. And we are so pleased to have with us today Mr. Curt Pringle. Curt, how are you? And there he is. There he is. Curt, great to have you with us today on such an unusual Wednesday.
I'm glad to be with you guys. This defines the last 4 months for all of us. Everything a little off kilter.
Yeah, just a little bit. So first of all, how are you holding up through COVID? Everything going okay for you?
It is. I mean, it's all, everybody wants to talk about a new normal, but nobody wants this to be normal. So this is just all these changes, and they're daily. So we all roll with them and understand it, and try to keep our businesses alive and our families safe and healthy.
Well, it's really cool that to have you on the program. We want to just say thanks in advance for taking the time out to come and be on here with us today. You started your political career. How did you get started doing that?
Well, that's one of those questions that I could jump to the middle or start at the true beginning. And the true beginning is I grew up in the city of Garden Grove, home of such great things as the Crystal Cathedral and now Christ Cathedral. I didn't attend either one of them, but that's where I went to school, and I was a Boy Scout, and part of the citizenship of the community merit badge requires you to go to a city council meeting. So I started going to city council meetings mainly for that merit badge, got really interested in local government, and a couple of years later, actually when I was 20, I ran for city council in Garden Grove. That's how I started.
And that's how you guys started, and you served in there for a while. And then how did you?
No, that's not the story. The story
it's not. Okay.
Lost. So, I mean, part of the story is I ran once and lost, ran twice and lost, and ran 3 times and finally lost. So I lost 3 times in a row in the city of Garden Grove for the city council. So I decided that wasn't the place I should be.
And so then the next step was to...
Well, I mean, this is, it is interesting because here I had that interest. I got involved in the Republican Party in Orange County and in fact was the vice chairman. And this is one of those paths of God that you don't have any control over, don't know where it's going, and all of a sudden it is before you. And that is the assemblyman, the state assembly. California has an upper and lower house, a Senate and a state assembly. And the state assemblyman in my area died the day after the June primary in 1988. So the Central Committee had to choose a replacement nominee, and out of the 10 people that put their name forward, they selected me as the replacement nominee, and I got elected in that election in 1988 to the state legislature.
Wow. And then how long did you serve there?
So I served there for 1 2-year term until I was beat.
Okay.
And then I was redistricted. My house, they didn't want me to run against the guy that beat me. So that was a year of reapportionment. So I was put in a different district. I ran that year in 1992 and was reelected and served for 6 years. At that time, California had term limits of 3 terms, 3 2-year terms of the state assembly. So I served for those 6 years till 1998. So I served a total of 8 years in the state legislature. All of which had very Democrat majorities in the legislature each year, except in after the 1994 election, and that's when I was Republican leader and then was elected Speaker of the Assembly in 1996.
Now, at somewhere in your bio, I read that you were the mayor of Anaheim as well. Now, when did that take place?
So I'm one of the awkward ones. I started in the state legislature, then went back to local government as opposed to running in local government and then advancing the state legislature.
I see.
I was out of office in 1998 and ran for mayor of Anaheim in 2002 and served there from 2002 until 2010.
Now that has to be a extremely. I mean, the Speaker of the House job had to bring tons of stories within itself, but then to be the mayor of the city, that is mostly known for the Rams and and for Disneyland, because as we live in Orlando, so we're a creature of Disney as well. Tell us just a little bit about what is it like working with a giant company like that on the government side.
Well, I had a great relationship with them, and we were always very much in sync. Now, former city councils and future city councils before and after me, they had different relationships with them. And there was an 8-year period, actually, where the city was really at odds with Disney on everything. And it is the question, so Disney is a behemoth, not just as a company, but really as an employer, as a presence, as a taxpayer. And I think sometimes people miss that value. So we can all sit around and be angry at one entity or one company, in this case Disney, and some elected officials are. Or you could say, okay, we know who they are, we need to work with them to better our community the best way possible. And I think once you demonstrate that, hey, there's a lot of assets and value, common ground that you can find. Disney is the largest single site employer in the state of California. So at Disneyland itself, wow, they employ more people there than at any other single place, any other single business in the state. And you think about this state of whatever it is, 38 million people, that's pretty impressive.
That is absolutely impressive. And
so why would you want to be at odds with
yeah,
them?
exactly.
So, mainly because those are lives. Those are people who live right here, who are working there, and that's their employer. They bring in 21, 22 million people a year to Anaheim for Disney activities. So it's really, really important. Now it's a little tough because they're closed, but
right.
Still.
Okay, so one of the reasons that we wanted to bring you on was not just to talk about your story, because your story is fascinating, and we could sit and listen to stories that I'm sure from your days in the house by itself, and would take up show after show. But the thing that I kind of really wanted to see what your take on is the current state of things, and then the way it's moving forward. I see there's some things on your website where you're always talking about the future and preparing for the future. I just love to hear your take on the state of how things are going right now.
Yeah, and thanks for referencing that. At my website, my company website at curtpringle.com, I started writing about the time of the pandemic and the COVID, stay-at-home orders. I thought it would really be important to just start putting a different type of perspective out there of thinking about tomorrow today, instead of just saying this is terrible, we're uncertain. It's maybe this is different, and we need to figure out ways to look at this a little better. What are some of the changes that are coming about in our life that really should be changes, positive changes, as opposed to just viewing all of this as negative changes? So that's what I started to do, and I really, maybe it's a little cathartic, maybe it's not that interesting to read, but it is more interesting for me to think about, because there are some changes that are important, and I think people need to look to embrace those. And I'm not talking about all the protest stuff. That might be a different topic for a different day. But more importantly, how our lives have been changed when we have the stay-at-home orders. Sure. And government control and government power. And I just, one of the things I really think is necessary to reference is it used to be forgive me for saying this, kind of that extreme element that would say, government could one day be all powerful and take away our freedoms and rights. That was awfully hard to believe until last March, this past March.
Yeah.
And in fact, governments at all level are now exhibiting powers that we never ever thought they could.
Yeah. Our guest today is Curt Pringle. He is the former Speaker of the House in the state of California, former mayor of Anaheim. I know that you were in Hawaii with us in March when we started to hear about everything starting to shut down. And we had all had that privilege of being in this cocoon environment to kind of really stay positive through this whole thing. But then when we all got home and we were so alerted to that, really what you're talking about really became, surging to the forefront for people. What should people really be thinking and preparing themselves for in a post-COVID world?
Yeah, I think we're going to be doing things differently in terms of how a lot of businesses operate. I mean, I'm really still concerned, and I mean, you in Florida and us in California, this resurgence of what's going. You had this slight breath of fresh air when a lot of businesses felt they could reopen, particularly restaurants and bars and things like that. That really have been devastated by much of this. A lot of my friends own restaurants, and that impact has been just unbelievable. But I think the impact has been even greater when they started to reopen, started to hire people, bought food, restocked their shelves, were preparing, for, good times ahead. And then, at least in our county in California, the snapback told they have to shut down, no more indoor dining. That's really tragic. But then some of those things thinking forward are looking at how people are working from home a lot more. And will there be a need for as much office space tomorrow as there had been, or in the future as there had been in the past? I don't think so. I mean, there's some talk. One analyst said in New York City, 40% of the office space in New York City will transition to another use. And if you think about that, just in terms of land use, think about how different commercial retailers are going to have to change, not only because of the online sales, but because of this whole COVID time, those types of big changes in terms of kind of the physical elements of our cities, I think are worth looking at.
Now, I know that when we were, I believe it was at one of the California events where I first met you, you were speaking about one of the biggest needs in some of these big cities is the need for affordable housing.
Right.
And I'm not trying to get you to really stand on a point here, but it's just interesting to talk about. Could that be something that we see some of these office buildings transition into something more like that?
Yeah, no, I certainly think so. I mean, there's reasons why, and I don't know where it is across the country, but in California, you could build a 4-story apartment with wood frame construction. So it's much less expensive than concrete and steel construction. But if you ever get into a high rise above 4 stories, did I say stories? 4 stories you can build with wood frame, wood products. Above that, you have to use steel and concrete, which is much, much, much more expensive.
Sure.
So that's why you don't see a lot of, tower housing in many of our communities, because it's just too expensive to build and goes beyond the price point of people who live there. But so your point is exactly right. If all of a sudden you're not going to be using these high-rise office buildings for the purpose they were originally built for, would those possibly be transitioned? And therefore you already have the shell of a facility that you might be able to build housing in that. It might be higher cost housing, but it also would mean there's more housing stock within a community. And I think the overall development of housing is a critical thing, at least in California and many other states.
Yeah. I know when I was just in Kentucky just a few weeks ago, or actually just the other day, we spent most of the quarantine time with my parents who live there. And the neighboring city to where my parents live, it's got a lot of old office buildings built in the 30s and things like that. But there was one that was built in the 70s that was about now for Kentucky, this is a real high rise. It was 13 or 14 stories. And they had just converted it all into high-end housing. And in this little small town, I was amazed at how fast that sold out. It converted and sold out just like that. So that's something very interesting to look about, especially people that are looking to invest in that kind of thing.
Right, exactly.
Our guest is Curt Pringle, the former mayor of Anaheim and former chair of the high-speed rail for California. Let's talk about that for a minute. How did you get involved in that?
Well, usually I don't talk about that much because it is one of those politically controversial things. And most people over the last few years have come to feel that building high-speed trains are kind of boondoggles in this country. But I will, be very direct. California passed an initiative to move forward with a high-speed rail in, it was probably, 12 years ago now. And with that, there were resources and there was a commitment to build high-speed rail from Los Angeles to San Francisco, being able to travel that distance in about 2 hours and 20 minutes. If you travel anywhere else in the world, high-speed trains are something that are very popular and are very prevalent and necessary in terms of moving people. So at that point in time, Governor Schwarzenegger in California appointed me to the high-speed rail authority, and I served there mainly because there's 2 ways you can go: a very heavily subsidized, rail system, or build out a rail system where the state may provide the foundation, the rail, but private operators operate trains within that system. So from a conservative point of view, I sat on high-speed rail doing everything I could to kind of direct it to this option, just like a highway. The state government builds a highway and people put their private cars on it and they pay gas tax to maintain it. That's a system used in many places in the world with rail. And that's what I wanted to see done here in California. So I served on the High-Speed Rail Authority until June of 2011. So anything that's been done in the last decade, don't blame me for that.
Okay, we won't hold you to that then. Okay, Curt, as I know as we're getting ready to wrap up the interview here, I know that there's so much that people are always looking forward to planning things for the future. And as somebody who's led your state, led your community through certainly times of change. Maybe it wasn't as unusual as these changes. What would, in your opinion, be the number one thing people should be embracing right now in order to grab hold of the next step in their life?
Yeah, isn't it something? I mean, I think if people are engaged in politics, the majority of people look at federal government as something that's flashy on TV. They certainly can see on CNN or Fox News or any of the other national cable shows. You hear about what's going on in the federal government on the national level. But I would argue that everybody's state government, and even more precisely, their local government, is what affects their lives more. So in this time, kind of this COVID time where we are maybe reassessing a lot of things, I think what people should really reassess is where they want to spend their focus in terms of what government they need to pay attention to. And your local government can close down neighborhood swimming pools and close down restaurants. They can build up a business base if they so choose, even during these times. And I see examples of that, different cities responding in different ways across the country. But people are really not involved, engaged, or aware of what happens on the local level. I think that should be people's charge, to say, I understand now that state and local government controls my life a lot more, and I better be involved and aware of, who is in charge and spreading those edicts, and who is in charge in terms of giving opportunity for the future in terms of business, job growth, education issues, and otherwise. So, if anything, I would say those political people out there, that's awesome, but be more just as focused on state and local issues because they affect you more.
All right, one last question, and then we'll let you go. If obviously
Sure.
the thing is that people should be getting registered to vote, and we are firm believers in that. At our church, we actually have registration times, before the elections every year. But besides registering to vote and getting out there, how can people really get involved in doing things like that?
Well, I mean, the number one thing is find somebody you like that's running for office. Now, that may be tough, and you might not be able to find anybody. But if you do, help them get elected. I mean, I was elected, believe it or not, for the first time 32 years ago. So that was a long time ago. That was when I was 29, so you can do the math how old I am right now. But some of those people who volunteered on my campaign, that worked, that really built a bond, I'm in contact with today. The value of individual volunteerism to advance and support people in office, I think, is really, really critical. And that can oftentimes in people's mind be overlooked by the money in politics, but the personal energy and time in politics is just as important, if not more.
Outstanding. Our guest today has been Curt Pringle, the former Speaker of the House for the state of California, and also the former mayor of Anaheim and the former chairman of the High-Speed Rail Commission there in California. Curt, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Your insight is amazing. I know that when I've heard you speak at the events, just talking about these things in the past are fascinating. And thank you for coming on and sharing those thoughts about the future.
Yeah, thanks you guys.
All right, God bless you. That's Curt Pringle, the former Speaker of the House of the state of California, former mayor of Anaheim, former chairman of the High-Speed Rail Commission. And wow, if you'd like to reach out to him and his company, it's right there. Curt Pringle and Associates on Instagram and Facebook, Curt Pringle Team on Twitter, and Curt Pringle and Associates on LinkedIn. I know that some folks think you don't talk about LinkedIn enough. Yeah, I know. We're on it as well. It's just Brent the Big Dog, but anyway, there you go. Curt's just a really excellent guy, and I'm so glad that he came on to be with us today. Friday on the program, we've got a great show planned for you. I've got world-renowned motivational speaker Simon T. Bailey. He's going to be with us to talk about releasing your inner brilliance. You don't want to miss that. Also, I want to remind you that if you get a chance to go online, pick up a copy of our new book. It's called What Smells So Good? Living with Favor in a World That Stinks. And it's available now on Amazon and on Kindle and on iBooks. So if you want to jump on and pick up a copy of that, please do. What Smells So Good? Living with Favor in a World That Stinks. The foreword was written by my brother and sister-in-law, Jenny and Brian Stavali, pastors at King of Kings Community Church in Los Angeles. And we're just excited to get this information into your hands. So jump online, buy a copy of the book if you can. For Joni and for Luke, thanks so much for joining us today. We'll see you Friday with Simon T. Bailey talking about releasing your inner brilliance. My thanks again to Curt Pringle, and we'll see you guys Friday. Have a great rest of your day. Get outside and break the cabin fever. Have a great day, everybody.